Tēnā koutou katoa whānau. Welcome to your last week of online learning for anatomy and physiology for level 3 health and wellbeing. There's two systems to cover this week. The first one that I'm going to take you through is the integumentary system, which will be followed by Kate, who will take you through some common conditions that you may come across for the system. And then you'll see Rachel, who will take you through the digestive system in the second session for this week. So let's get into it and have a look at our objectives for the week. So learning objectives for this session: describe and name the anatomy, so the working parts of the integumentary system, and we want to describe or understand the physiology, so the structure of the bits and the function or the physiology. Okay, so we're going to talk about the integumentary system and the different parts of it. How you should think about this system is it basically consists of all the coverings. So we're going to talk about the main ones, 4 main parts today. There is more, so we're going to talk about the majors, so skin and the glands and the hair and nails, and it also includes the internal lining. So for example, and a good example of that is the digestive system, so say the internal lining of the digestive tract, so the stomach and the large intestine, small intestine, and how they all work. You know, they would be considered part of the integumentary system, or that type of tissue, epithelial tissue as well. So the 4 areas that we're going to cover are skin, hair, nails, and glands. So we're going to talk about the structure of those cells and what their job is and how they do that. So you can hopefully understand that in a little bit more detail. Right, so what I want you to do right now is to pause the video lecture right here, grab a pen and paper, and I want you to just write down a few ideas about what you think from what you already know about what the functions of skin are. So I'm going to outline shortly about 7 of them. So if you can pause the video right there before continuing on, write some notes on what you think the skin does. You might only end up with 1 or 2 things. That's cool. We're going to go through each of the functions on the next slide and going forward. So pause the video here before you move on to the next part. Did you pause it? Okay, so whether you did or you didn't doesn't matter. We're going to go through here. Obviously, it's good to get an idea about what you already know, so then you can focus on learning the stuff that you don't. So from here, the functions of the skin, 7 main functions we're going to touch on today. The first one, and probably the most common one, and if you stopped the video and had a bit of a stab, you would have hopefully said something like it's a barrier. Okay, so it's like a raincoat for our body. It stops stuff coming in that we don't want to come in, that can be harmful to the internal workings of it. Okay, so a mechanical or physical barrier is the number 1 function of the skin. Function number 2, so it protects internal structures and organs from being injured. Okay, so essentially it's like, you know how motorcyclists wear leathers to protect themselves in case of an accident, because it kind of helps hold everything in. Essentially the skin does that for our internal organs too. So it acts to protect things from the external environment. Again, because we've developed all of these technologies for transport that have us going much faster speeds than what our bodies are capable of. Our skin or our integumentary system is not able to cope with those kind of forces, but the stuff we normally subject it to, it can handle pretty well. Okay, and number 3, it supports the immune system by alerting it when it detects a foreign invader. So when the skin's broken, there are some special cells that tell the immune system so it can prepare to fight. So any germs, bacteria, those type of things. Again, it helps. It's that when you talk about the immune system, and you would have heard it mentioned when talking about the immune system, it's one of the first levels or the first stages of defense when you talk about the immune system as the skin. Okay, moving on. Number 4, it excretes, or in simple terms, it gets rid of wastes, water and salt. So we can, it's one way that we can get rid of waste. Obviously there's a few ways within our body. That's one way that we can easily get rid of, especially water and salts or electrolytes, and some other wastes as well. So it's a reason why, when you've been eating huge amounts of garlic, you can smell it on your skin because it's a waste that your body will use what it needs and then get rid of the rest. By the same token, if you've had a big night out, sometimes you can still smell that coming out through your skin on the next day as well. So that's number 4. Number 5, helps make vitamin D. So when your skin's exposed to sunlight, the cells produce vitamin D, which is needed to help us absorb calcium. So really important in terms of bone health, really important in terms of sunshine. Getting sunshine on your skin regularly is really important for the health of that whole system. Sensory receptors. So it contains special sensors that help us sense pain, pressure, touch, and change in temperature. So obviously we've all had enough experience with our own bodies to know that that we're able to feel when things are hot or cold, sharp, all of those things, so that there's a number of sensors within the skin that help us detect that. Okay, so we'll have a look at those in a little bit of detail when we get to some of the diagrams a little bit further on. And it helps control our body temperature. So the main thing there is the blood vessels that are just below the skin. Your body will shift blood towards there if we need to try and if we're trying to cool down and we're trying to lose heat, or it will take blood away from the skin if we're trying to retain heat because we're cold or we're going down that hypothermic track. Okay, so a really important function there. Obviously, sweat evaporating from the skin is also part of that kind of temperature regulation as well. So those two things. So this is a type of diagram you're going to need to be able to label. The one in your test isn't exactly like this, but it's pretty similar. So the main things that you'll need to be able to identify, some of them will be really, really easy. So you should be able to look at any diagram of the skin and go, the hair shaft or the hair follicle should be relatively straightforward to identify. The pores, so the holes, little holes in the skin there. When you're talking about the glands, so there's 2 different glands there, one being the sebaceous gland, which is this one here, and the eccrine or sweat gland. Okay, and on some pictures, the important distinction to make between those when you're trying to identify them on a diagram is that the sebaceous gland is, you'll see it's attached to the hair follicle near the shaft of your the hair, and the sweat gland is connected to the pores. Okay, so obviously when you sweat, that's where it comes out through your pores. The secretions of the sebaceous gland come out there through the shaft of the hair. So we're going to talk about 3 different layers here. The top layer being the epidermis, or the most superficial layer, the middle layer being the dermis, and the deepest layer, the subcutaneous tissue, also known as the hypodermis. Okay, so epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. We're going to talk a little bit in detail about the function of those different parts. You'll also see another couple of diagrams that will hopefully help you get your head around what's going on here as well. Okay, so that very top layer called the epidermis has some important characteristics. So, and important to remember, epi, when you ever hear that in relation to layers, it's normally the most superficial or the closest to the surface of the skin. So it's the outer layer of the skin. It's made up of special epithelial or connective tissue. It contains keratin, which is a protein, and that's what makes it waterproof. So when we're out in the rain, so that any water, like we don't absorb water through the skin, because that would then become difficult in terms of trying to regulate our blood volume and our level of fluid balance within the body. Okay, it keeps making new skin cells that eventually die off and flake away. So you have heard people talk about, how we replace and repair cells all the time, particularly evident in the skin, and these cells are shed. So we shed many hundreds of thousands and millions of cells every day, and that's exactly why you should wash your clothes and your sheets regularly, because that's where that stuff ends up most of the time. So important to understand that there's layers, and from the inside to the out, there's kind of still living layers at the bottom, and as it gets towards the outside of the epidermis, that's when the skin dies and flakes off, and then obviously it gets replaced by the new stuff underneath. Okay, and it also contains the pigment called melanin, which gives our skin its colour. All right, so those are the important things to know about the epidermis, and just remember that is the most superficial layer. So that's the closest to the surface of the skin. So that's what you're touching. Right. So now we're going to talk about the middle layer called the dermis. So this is essentially made of strong elastic tissue. So structurally, it essentially holds the epidermis and the hypodermis together. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on there. So in terms of structures that we'll have a look at the diagrams a little bit later on. But it's made of strong elastic tissue. It's under the epidermal layer. It's the chunkiest or the thickest layer because it contains the base of hair, nails, oil glands, and sweat glands. Okay, so we'll have a look at that when we get to the diagrams. Essentially, it contains all of this stuff, and it is particularly strong connective tissue. It's the most stretchy or most flexible layer. However, if it's overstretched, this creates stretch marks. So this is the layer of your skin that if you lose a huge amount of weight, or you have a pregnancy that stretches that layer, that's the layer that, depending on our age and how elastic our skin is, that's the level at which those things, stretch marks, are evident. Okay, provides nutrients to keep the epidermis alive. So remember, the skins that flake off from the epidermis, they're not alive, but the base layer of that is. Those cells are still living, so the dermis provides nutrients to keep the epidermal layer alive. Also provides nutrients to the dermis itself. Okay, and so we can have medication absorbed through the dermal layer. An example of this would be, say, nitroglycerin via patches. Unfortunately, the skin can also absorb toxins. So pesticides like mercury, acetone, nail polish remover, all of those nasties that we don't really want in our body. This type of absorption through the dermal layer is called transdermal. So, the epidermis is a thin layer. The more things that we put on our skin, or topical medicines and chemicals, some of those things are desirable to absorb through that channel, but others wouldn't. So repeated exposure to things on your skin that could be potentially absorbed there could be harmful to your health. Okay, one more layer. Layer number 3, the subcutaneous layer. So that is below the dermis, also known as the hypodermis because of that fact. So hypo, prefix meaning low, so hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, hypothermia, low body temperature. Hypodermis means that's the layer of the skin that's below the dermal layer. So hypodermis, dermis, epidermis is the most superficial one. Okay, mostly made of loose connective tissue and fat. That's where we store excess energy. We'll store as body fat, subcutaneous body fat. Some of us will have more of it than others. Okay, this layer helps insulate the body and protect it from extreme temperature changes, and also anchors the skin to the body. So obviously, if your skin wasn't attached kind of all over there, it would flop around all over the place when you ran, and when I was talking, my whole face would kind of be flopping around. So yeah, it acts to attach that the skin to the body, to the tissues of the body. It also helps. Talking about insulation is not only related to temperature. You could say it also insulates or protects from trauma as well. Okay, so drugs are often injected into this layer, so subcutaneous, with hypodermic needles. It is ideal because its rich blood supply can transport the drug quickly around the body. Okay, so things that we need to transport around quickly, so medications that need to act fast to deal with, all sorts of medical issues. It's quite common to have those types of things injected subcutaneously. So things like, and the most common probably example of that would be insulin. So it's injected into the subcutaneous layer. Because as it said, it's absorbed quickly because of the rich blood supply there. Not all areas of the body have a subcutaneous layer. So, for example, the covering of your knuckle bones, they don't have that particular layer of skin because they don't kind of really need those functions. Everything is still attached, so there's still connective tissue that attaches the other layers. But we don't need that same insulation, say, as other areas in our body. Okay, so that wraps up skin. Okay, we're going to move on to hair, which is the second type of tissue we're going to talk about and how important it is. So again, I want you to stop the video and jot down some ideas about what you think how hair is useful to us as humans. So not just so that we can look wonderful straight out of the barbers or the hairdressers for our partners or significant others, but there's actually physiological functions that hair has within our body, and different types of hair in different places as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Again, we're kind of just scratching the surface in terms of the functions, but you'll get a pretty good idea as we go. So pause the video here, and then I want you to go and have a look at writing some ideas down and then come back to the next part of the video there. So stop it in the name of love, people. Okay, we're back to talk about hair. What is the function of it? Number one for us, hopefully you've got a few ideas that you managed to come up with there, different types of hair around your body. So the most important thing that hair does for us is it protects different parts of our body in different ways. So we're going to give you a few examples of how that looks. So the first one is the eyelashes and the eyebrows. So they're to protect the eyes from foreign particles. So the eyelashes, obviously, and along with that blink reflex, help stop physical particles, dust, and other kind of pollutants getting into our eyes. That can obviously cause damage to our eyes themselves. And the eyebrows will stop sweat and other kind of moisture coming from our noggin down into our eyes. So that's the first example there we've got of hair and how it protects, in this case, our eyes. Second part is we've got the hair inside of our nose that traps dust and protects our lungs. So it prevents that dust entering our lungs. So it traps it in the nose. We can then blow it out and get rid of it, and it doesn't cause any drama with that gas exchange that is super important to our survival and to our to our overall function. So without that really good oxygen exchange at the lungs, obviously the rest of our body doesn't function very well. So that hair in your nose that stops dust going down into the lungs is really super important. You'll see that if you've ever been working in a dusty environment. You mow the lawns and it's really dry, or there's lots of pollen and dust floating around. When you go to blow your nose, it can be a pretty kind of brown or black, nasty colour because of all the stuff that you've caught, or the hairs in your nose have caught, so that you can then get it out of the body without it troubling your internal organs. Okay, hair on our head, some of us have more than others. It helps keep us warm. So this stuff helps keep me warm a little bit. If you've got a little bit more, you've probably got slightly better insulation, but our heads are an area of our body that lose a lot of heat. So when we are cold in the winter, I tend to grow my hair a little bit longer in the winter or wear a hat, but the function of the hair on our head is to keep our scalp and keep our head warm. So try and minimize the heat loss. Like, we're not very efficient machines at minimizing heat loss, but that's one way that our body's figured to do that. So giving us a little bit of insulation. Obviously that's probably where the stuff comes in as well when we were running around and living in caves and stuff. So alright, so the sparse hair that covers most of our skin alerts us when something is near our skin. So a good example of that is you will be able to feel insects before they're actually on your skin because of the layer of hair that's there and the sensory organs that are close to and attached to them, so that we have time to react to stuff like that. So again, it's another good protective measure that hair gives us in relation to our body. So there's some really good reasons that we need hair in all different places. Okay, the second major function that hair has within our body is related to temperature regulation. So there's a little muscle here. So this picture, this diagram has been simplified from our original diagram that just has the parts of the anatomy that are related to the hair and the follicle. This little muscle here, the erector pili muscle, when it contracts, it stands your hair up on end, which helps trap a layer of air between your body and the external environment. So it's designed, our body, the hair all over our bodies, is designed to trap a layer of air to keep us warm in the cooler temperatures, So, when we were still running around being chased by dinosaurs, we were much hairier than what we are now, because a lot of us live indoors and find hair less desirable these days, and we have it waxed or lasered or shaved or whatever, then, this will affect that function in terms of temperature regulation. So, it's important to remember that hair has a function, and understand that it's there for a reason. And obviously, if there'll be kind of implications if you decide to get rid of it. Okay, it's brainstorm time. So now we're going to move on to talking about nails. So we're kind of wrapped up the important aspects of what hair does for us. Now we're going to look into nails and how they're important. So again, please stop the video, have a bit of a brainstorm, have a bit of a think about why nails, I don't have pretty nails, but I have nails, why they're important in terms of function for our bodies. So what important role do they have in the integumentary system? Because they're there for a reason. Like every other cell and tissue and organ in our body has a function, has a job to do. Nails also have a job to do. So pause it, have a think about it. Again, if you have an empty page or you've only got one or two things written there, that's cool. So I want you to think about it before we rip into the next part of the lecture. So pause it there. Okay, we're back. Nails. What are the parts and function of the fingers and toenails? So nails are made up of a tough protein called keratin. Okay. Again, it's the same protein that's found in the skin. Obviously, the density and concentration is different in the nails because the texture and the requirement for this tissue is a little bit, needs to be a little bit tougher, a little bit harder, so it has more of that protein in it. As the nail body grows, it slides over a layer called the nail bed. So the nail bed is part of the epidermis. So remember we talked about those three layers of the skin: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. Epidermis is the most superficial one. Okay, so the nail grows over that part of the epidermis. The blood vessels on the dermis give the nails their pink colour. Okay, so anybody that's ever done a first aid course, you can check blood flow or perfusion by squeezing on the nail bed, and you'll see it will go white and then go back to pink again as it refills with blood. It's a good way to assess circulation in the fingers or the toes, and yes, so just like the skin, and we talked about earlier, the toenails and fingernails tell us a story about a person's state of health. So just as the skin shows irritation, inflammation, rashes, itching when things aren't going well for the body, the fingers and toenails can tell us a story about people's health. So they should be examined for the following things: shape. They should be symmetrical. So if there's clubbing of the fingernails, it could indicate a lack of oxygenated blood over a long period of time. Okay, this happens in chronic lung or heart disease when there's poor circulation. So, important that when you're working with your clients, with your patients, that this is something that should be checked on a regular basis. Dorsal curvature. Okay, so it should have a natural curve. The colour should be pink with oxygenated blood and not blue-red, which indicates lack of oxygen in the blood. Adhesion to the nail bed, so obviously they shouldn't be kind of flapping around all over the place. They should be attached well and securely. And the thickness of the nail, so they shouldn't be too thick or too thin. Okay, so these are the things that you kind of need to watch out for. when it comes to keeping an eye on your clients. The main function of the fingernail is this: protect the ends of our fingers and toes. Pretty straightforward. They're a sensitive area with not much skin, so you can see there that picture shows us that there is a lot going on there, and the epidermis is really close to the bone. Okay, that can mean that that area is particularly sensitive to touch, to trauma, to temperature, to all of those things. So the nail itself protects the ends of the fingers and the ends of the toes from all of those things affecting it. All right, we're going to move on to the last section. Glands. There is 2 glands that we've briefly mentioned before. One is the sebaceous gland and the other is the sweat gland. Okay, so what I want you to do is stop the video again just for a couple of minutes and write on your same piece of paper, or flip it over if you need to. If it's still looking empty and you haven't written anything on it, that's also okay. So by the end, obviously, you should know the answers to most of these things. So what do you think these glands do? All right, here we are, back to have a talk about the glands. So there's 2 main glands, as we said, sebaceous glands and sweat glands within the skin, within that dermal layer of the skin. Sebaceous glands, also called oil glands, what do? They're found in areas of the body that have hair. Okay, so these are the ones that are attached to the hair follicle. So when you're labeling your diagram and you're trying to figure out the difference between, or which one on there is a sebaceous gland and which one is a sweat gland, the sebaceous glands are the ones that are attached to the hair follicle, okay, or the shaft of the hair. When you're looking at your diagram. So we'll look at one more diagram after this so you can kind of see what I mean. They secrete and release an oil called sebum, which waterproofs the hair and the skin and also lubricates it. Okay, so really important function in terms of, again, that role of the integumentary system and keeping everything outside of our body that shouldn't be inside. And that would cause havoc. So that oil, that substance called sebum, is really important there. Also stops bacteria from growing on the skin. Okay, so yeah, really important role there. Obviously, we don't want bacteria growing anywhere because it'll cause infection and inflammation, all kinds of nasty stuff going on. So if a sebaceous gland has become blocked, for example, too much sebum, and get infected from bacteria, this forms a pustule or pimple. Yeah, less than ideal, and it is what it is. So we're going to move on there to talk about, so just remember sebaceous glands, they're attached to the hair follicles. So when you're identifying them on a diagram, you need to remember that. If you can remember that they release something called sebum, helps waterproofing, lubricate, and stops bacteria growing, those are the important points to take away from that slide. Okay, sweat glands are in the dermis. Okay, they secrete and release sweat into a duct that opens onto the skin as a pore. Okay, so they're not attached to the hair. The pores in your skin, the holes in your skin that you can actually physically see, they are all connected to a sweat gland. When you sweat, that's where it comes out. Okay, really pretty simple. We have about 3 million odd sweat glands each. Okay, so that's quite a large number. We can sweat in all kinds of places, depending on how higher intensity exercise we're engaging in, or how hot the environment is that we are in. Okay, when sweat builds up on the skin, a bacteria breaks it down. Unfortunately, as this happens, a very strong unpleasant odor is released. We call this body odor. So generally, sweat's produced to try and help regulate body temperature. The deal is that it evaporates off the skin. It evaporates off the skin to help cool the blood that has been redirected towards the skin, because the body temperature has risen from the external environment or from exercise or whatever. Okay, so when it sits on the skin and isn't evaporated and bacteria breaks it down, that's when we get that happening. So again, we would talk about needing to, if you're talking about your patients or your clients, if you have any that are prone to this or have issue with this in their, it's particularly important for them and their health and well-being, for that to be sorted by, obviously, efficient personal cares and making sure that the hygiene procedures are followed with each of your clients. Okay, sweat glands allow us to get rid of excess heat and water and salt, which helps control our body temperature. So like I said, helps us regulate the temperature, also helps us regulate the amount of fluid we have in our body, but it's, essentially, again, important to understand that if you lose a lot of fluid through sweat, if you sweat a lot, you need to drink a lot of water to balance that out. But their major function is in that, particularly in that temperature regulation space. Okay, so this here's the diagram I was talking about. You can see it's a little bit more complex. There's a little bit more. It's a little bit more kind of 3D than 2D, kind of. But you can see there, when you look at the sebaceous glands and when you look at the sweat glands, they might be slightly different shapes or colours depending on the picture or the text or the resource that you're reading. But I can see from here that if I'm looking at labelling, these ones here that are attached to the hair follicle, I know those are the ones that are related to sebum. They're the sebaceous glands. So as long as you remember that they're the ones that attach to the hair follicle, you can see in this picture that the sweat glands are purple. Again, you've got a duct going up to here, to the pore, which is labelled over there. Okay, so this one has a few more things than probably we need to know. So epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis, or subcutaneous, we talked about earlier. It has the blood supply, so you can see the blood vessels going through that hypodermis. You can see there's blood supply all the way through the dermis. You'll also notice that the epidermis is relatively avascular. So you need to cut all the way through the epidermis normally for you to get blood, just because, again, these, only the bottom layer of these is living, and as you go up towards the surface there, then those cells are flaking off and dying and flaking off. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up there. What I want you to do from there is have a look at the activities on the Moodle page. There is a couple of things for you to have a look at there to help solidify this. By all means, go back over and kind of repeat or replay the parts of this that you didn't understand. And hopefully that's helpful in getting you an idea about what the integumentary system is all about, being able to describe some of the parts and the physiology or the actions or the job of each of those parts of the integumentary system. So we kind of covered off the four main ones, being skin, hair, nails, and the glands. So as long as you know the basics of what each of those things do, that's I would consider that our objective met for this session. So Again, we're just scratching the surface and giving you guys an introduction to each of these systems. There's so much more to learn if you go digging and go and grab one of those 600 to 700 page anatomy physiology texts from the library. You could read for days and days about the integumentary system, about the digestive system, about the cardiovascular system. There is so much to learn. This is a basic introduction, and so I'm going to leave you with that. And Kate is going to jump on and talk to you a little bit about conditions that relate to the system. So with that, I will say ka kite anō. We'll see you all again soon, and hopefully we'll see you all back on campus really soon as well. So stay safe and be kind. Ta ta.